Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something that sooner or later is going to get deeply personal for almost half of us. That's right, hair loss is incredibly common, affecting up to 50% of both men and women during their lifetimes. But even though it's this universal human experience, it's still wrapped up in so much misunderstanding and quiet anxiety. So today we're going to completely normalize the topic by breaking down the exact science behind the whole shebang.
So let's just get right to it. We've all had that mini heart attack, right? You look down at the shower drain or your brush and think, is losing 100 hairs a day a medical emergency? Or is this just my biology doing its thing?
Well, you can go ahead and exhale. The average human scalp is literally packing around 150,000 hairs. Because you have that massive volume up there, shedding about 50 to 125 hairs every single day is completely natural. It's fully expected, it's just your body's routine maintenance. But the real question is, when does that routine actually break down? To answer that, here's our roadmap for today. 1. History to present. 2. Natural biology. 3. Genetic legacy. 4. Shedding types. 5. External triggers. And 6. Current treatments.
All right, part 1, history to present, from ancient views to now.
You know, stressing about balding isn't just some modern vanity thing. It is an ancient human experience that goes way, way back. Take this fascinating anecdote from ancient Rome. Even Julius Caesar, a guy who conquered the known world, viewed his hair loss as a frustrating weakness. To hide his receding hairline, he cleverly combed his hair forward and actually used his famous laurel wreath to cover it up. He practically invented the ultimate historical comb-over.
Moving on to part 2, natural biology and the follicle life cycle.
Now, we've certainly come a long way since the laurel wreath, but to figure out why hair falls out and how to actually treat it, we kind of have to understand how it grows in the first place. Your hair isn't just sitting there in a static state. Every single hair follicle operates on its own independent, nonstop biological cycle, physically transforming as it goes through some very specific phases.
So here's the breakdown of that timeline. It's basically 3 phases. First up is anagen. That's the active growth phase, where protein synthesis happens, and it lasts a massive 5 years. At any given second, about 85% of your hair is just hanging out in this phase, growing away. Next is catagen, a quick 3-week resting phase where things slow down. And finally, telogen. That's the shedding phase, and it lasts around 3 months. Problematic hair loss basically happens when this nice, predictable routine gets thrown off.
Which brings us to part 3, genetic legacy and androgenetic alopecia.
So what actually breaks that cycle? For a lot of folks, it comes down to a genetic inheritance called androgenetic alopecia. Let's simplify the complex biology here. The main culprit is a super potent hormone metabolite called DHT, or dihydrotestosterone. Basically, an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase takes standard testosterone and converts it into DHT. If you have the genetic sensitivity for it, this DHT acts like a tiny wrecking ball. It attacks the follicles, cuts that awesome 5-year anagen growth phase way short, and literally shrinks those thick, healthy terminal hairs down into thin, barely visible vellus hairs.
All right, part 4, shedding types, specifically looking at men versus women.
While genetics and DHT are the big drivers, how this actually looks when you look in the mirror is totally different depending on your biological gender. For guys, it usually follows the Norwood scale. You'll see bitemporal recession, that classic M shape at the hairline, plus thinning at the vertex or the crown. But for women, it follows the Lidvik scale, and this is fascinating. The front hairline usually stays miraculously intact. Instead, the hair loss happens as a diffuse central thinning across the top, often looking like a pine tree shape when the hair is parted down the middle.
You can instantly see the stark difference right here. On the left, you've got the male patient showing that classic vertex thinning and receding front. Then on the right, the female patient shows the widened central part, that pine tree pattern, with the front hairline perfectly preserved. Spotting these visual patterns is absolutely crucial for doctors to make a diagnosis.
Okay, moving to part 5, external triggers, like drugs and stress.
But what if your hair loss doesn't fit that genetic pattern at all? Let's shift gears from genetic destiny to environmental disruptors. Because sometimes sudden terrifying hair loss comes from an external shock to your body. It's a condition called telogen effluvium. Remember that telogen shedding phase we talked about? Well, extreme physical or emotional stress can literally shock your system and force a massive number of those actively growing anagen hairs straight into the shedding phase, all at once. But hey, there's reassuring news here. Unlike genetic hair loss, telogen effluvium is highly reversible once you remove whatever triggered it. And what triggers it can be surprisingly everyday stuff. We're talking severe stress, massive fevers, or common medications. Things like retinoids in dermatology, blood thinners like heparin, beta blockers, or even some antidepressants like fluoxetine. We also see anagen effluvium, which is immediate hair loss usually triggered by chemo targeting rapidly dividing cells. But here's a crazy fact about telogen effluvium. The actual shedding usually doesn't start until 2 or 3 entire months after the trigger event, so you literally have to look backwards in time to find the real culprit.
Finally, Part 6, Current Treatments and Medical Interventions. All right, we know the causes, from ancient genetics to modern meds. Now let's talk solutions, strictly scientifically proven ones. First up is minoxidil. It's a topical vasodilator, meaning it boosts blood flow and actively extends that growth phase, and it works for both men and women. Then there's finasteride. This is an oral med for men that inhibits that 5-alpha reductase enzyme, basically cutting off DHT right at the source. For women, doctors often use anti-androgens like spironolactone. Think of it like a shield. It blocks the androgen receptors and intercepts those offending hormones before they can shrink the follicle.
But hold on, before you run out to get a prescription, I need to issue a major reminder here. Patience is the ultimate prescription. These treatments demand immense consistency. They do not work overnight. You're generally looking at 6 to 12 months of continuous use to see the maximum visible effect. And here's the real kicker: they don't rewrite your genetic code. If you stop taking them, all that hard-earned progress reverses and the hair loss aggressively kicks back in.
And that wraps up our explainer. We've learned that shedding 100 hairs a day is totally normal, but actual hair loss is this wild puzzle of genetics, hormones, and environmental triggers. But as we've seen, we definitely aren't limited to hiding beneath a laurel wreath like Julius Caesar anymore. So I'll leave you with this final thought. Is our genetic legacy a permanent destiny, or, armed with the right medical knowledge and a whole lot of consistency, can modern science finally rewrite the future of our hair? Thanks for tuning in and keep exploring.